Before we start, a quick reminder to hit the subscribe button. Only 4% of my channel is subscribed. When it reaches 1,000 subscribers, I will release a special video. Chapter 5. The heart of the matter. Under the ethereal glow of the northern lights, Hans and Ilara labored side by side in the secluded barn that had become their makeshift workshop. The once alien technology of the spacecraft now lay spread across the floor in organized chaos, each piece a testament to their tireless efforts and growing bond. The chill of the Swedish winter was kept at bay by a sturdy old stove Hans had fired up, its warmth a meager but comforting presence against the metallic cold of alien machinery. Ilara, her fingers deftly maneuvering with a tool Hans had never seen before, a sort of wrench that hummed with a gentle blue light, paused and looked up at Hans. Her ice-blue eyes reflected a mix of determination and weariness. "We're close, Hans," she said, her voice a soft echo in the vast emptiness of the barn. "Just a few more adjustments, and it should be ready to fly." Hans, who had been tightening a panel with a more conventional screwdriver, stopped and wiped his brow. He was not just physically tired, his heart felt weighed down by a growing dread. "And then?" he asked, his voice rough like the bark of the old pines outside. Ilara set her tool down and stepped closer. In the flickering light from the stove, her face seemed to soften. "Then I go back," she said quietly, the weight of those words hanging between them. The barn seemed to close in around Hans, the walls echoing his unspoken fears. He had known this moment would come, but the reality of it gripped his chest with a surprising ferocity. He was an old man, his life tethered to the soil and seasons of his homeland, and yet here he was, contemplating the cosmos with a woman who had changed the very fabric of his existence. "Ilara, Hans started, his voice faltering. He took a deep breath, feeling the cold seep through the cracks of the barn, reminding him of the isolation that had been his only companion for so long before she crashed into his world. Ilara moved closer, her hand reaching out to gently grasp his. "Hans, these past weeks, you've given me more than just shelter and aid. You've given me a glimpse of humanity, its resilience, its warmth. I've never felt less alone than I do now, here with you." Her words stirred something within Hans, a torrent of emotions he hadn't allowed himself to fully acknowledge. Loneliness, hope, and now a burgeoning love. "And I have never felt more alive than I have with you," he admitted, his voice a mere whisper against the howl of the wind outside. "But what happens when you leave? What remains for an old farmer who dared to touch the stars?" Ilara's grip tightened, her thumb caressing his weathered hand. "What if the stars are just the beginning, Hans?" she proposed, a hint of something more in her tone. "What if there's a way for us to explore them together?" The possibility hung in the air, audacious and wild. Hans's heart, which had been tempered by decades of solitude and simplicity, now pounded with a new purpose. He looked into Ilara's eyes, seeing not just the alien beauty they held, but a reflection of his own newfound desires. "Tell me," he urged, his earlier resolve giving way to curiosity and a burgeoning hope. Ilara smiled, a radiant expression that seemed to light up the dim barn. "Let's finish the repairs first. Then I'll show you what I mean. Trust me, Hans. There's much more to my world than you can imagine, and perhaps there's more to yours and your future than you ever allowed yourself to dream." Invigorated by her words, Hans returned to his task with a renewed vigor. The tools in his hands no longer felt foreign or intimidating. They were keys to unlocking a future he had never dared to envision. As they worked into the night, the barn no longer felt like a cage keeping him grounded, but rather a launch pad into the unknown. In that moment, Hans realized that regardless of how daunting the universe was, it was also filled with infinite possibilities. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was not too late for an old farmer to become an explorer of the cosmos. Chapter 6. The Turning Point. The air was crisp, a chill wrapping around Hans's farm as twilight approached, casting long shadows over the fields and the barn. Inside the barn, Under the harsh glare of makeshift lighting, Hans and Alara stood before the spacecraft, their faces etched with fatigue and anxiety. It was a moment both had anticipated and dreaded. Today they would test the spacecraft's repairs, the culmination of weeks of laborious effort and shared secrets. Hans wiped his hands on a cloth, his eyes tracing the sleek alien contours of the craft. The vessel, once a harbinger of the unknown, now felt almost familiar, like an old friend. Alara, standing beside him, adjusted a panel on the spacecraft's side. Her hands moved with precision, betraying neither doubt nor hesitation, but her eyes occasionally stole glances at Hans, filled with a complexity of emotions. "Ready to try this?" Alara's voice broke the tense silence, her accent lilting strangely in the quiet barn. Hans nodded, his throat tight. "Let's see if all our work paid off." Together, they initiated the startup sequence. The craft hummed to life, a low, pulsing thrum that vibrated through the barn's wooden frame. Lights along the craft's body flickered on, bathing the barn in a soft, alien glow. Hans's heart pounded in his chest, not just in fear of failure, but in a sudden, piercing realization of what success would mean. The craft stabilized, its systems responding perfectly. No alarms, no flickers of failure. It was ready. Hans turned to Alara, expecting to see triumph, but found her expression mirrored his own conflict, a blend of relief and sorrow. "It works," Alara whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the craft. Hans swallowed hard. "Yeah, it works." The words tasted bittersweet. He reached out, his hand hesitating in the air before resting gently on the hull of the spacecraft. The cold metal seemed to sear his palm, a stark reminder of the impending departure. Alara touched his shoulder, her cool fingers squeezing gently. "Hans, She paused, searching his face. "I never thought I'd be sad to see it working." "Nor did I," Hans confessed, turning to face her. In the glow of the spacecraft, her features were cast in sharp relief, her beauty otherworldly yet so painfully present. "Alara, these weeks helping you, it's changed something in me. I don't want this to end." Alara moved closer, her presence enveloping him. "I don't either." Her eyes, luminous and deep, held him in a gaze that spoke of stars and skies beyond his reach. "But I have something that might help, something for my world." Curiosity piqued, Hans watched as Alara retrieved a small device from the craft. It was sleek, intricate, emitting a soft blue light. "What is it?" he asked, his voice a mix of wonder and apprehension. "It's a regenerator. It can rejuvenate organic tissue, slow aging. Hans, it can give us more time." Alara's offer hung between them, profound and promising. Hans felt a rush of emotions. More time, more life. The prospect was both thrilling and terrifying. He thought of his quiet life, his solitude, and the spark that had ignited within him since Alara crashed into his world. Could he embrace such a drastic change? "Alara, are you sure about this?" His question was laden with unspoken fears. Alara nodded, her hand reaching out to clasp his. "I've never been more sure of anything." With a deep breath, Hans made his decision. "Then let's do it." Alara activated the device, and a gentle wave of light enveloped Hans. It felt warm, invigorating, as if the very essence of life was coursing through him. His old aches vanished, his vision sharpened, and vitality surged through his veins like a newly awakened river. As the light faded, Hans felt reborn. He looked at Alara, her smile radiant and hopeful. Together they stepped back, gazing at the spacecraft that would soon take them beyond the stars. But for that moment, they were grounded, united by their shared future. In that barn, under the soft alien light, Hans and Alara embraced. A farmer and an explorer, bound by love and the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. The craft hummed softly, a ready companion for their upcoming journey. But for now, it was just the two of them, the world outside forgotten. This chapter, steeped in emotion and pivotal decisions, not only propels the narrative forward, but deepens the bond between Hans and Alara, setting the stage for their interstellar journey. Chapter 7: A New Horizon. As dawn stretched its pale fingers across the Swedish countryside, the tranquility of the farm seemed to stand in stark contrast to the turmoil churning within Hans. The spacecraft, now fully repaired and humming with a soft, otherworldly glow, sat ready in the shelter of the old barn. Hans, looking at it from his porch, felt a tug of conflicting emotions. The morning air was crisp, the kind that reminded him of the early days of spring, yet his heart was weighed down by a decision that could change the course of his remaining life. Alara stood beside him, her eyes reflecting the azure sky. She had become so much more than a visitor from the stars. She was his confidant, his unexpected joy, and now perhaps his future. "It's ready, Hans," she said softly, her voice a gentle nudge back to reality. "We can leave whenever you're ready." Hans nodded slowly, his gaze drifting from the spacecraft to the sprawling fields he had tended for decades. Each furrow and tree whispered memories, each corner of the land echoing the laughter and toils of a lifetime. The decision wasn't just about leaving a place, it was about leaving a piece of himself behind. "I never imagined," Hans began, his voice thick with emotion, "that at this stage of my life, I'd stand here contemplating such an adventure. I was ready to quietly fade away with these fields as my only witness." Alara took his hand, her touch both alien and intimate. "Life has a peculiar way of surprising us, doesn't it? Just when we think our story is set, a new chapter beckons." The warmth of her hand seeped into his, a symbol of the rejuvenation she had gifted him. Not just the physical vigor, which felt like a return to his youthful days, but a rejuvenation of the spirit. Hans realized that with Alara, the closing chapters of his life could be written in the stars, an adventure he had never allowed himself to even dream of. Turning to face her, Hans's eyes were resolute. "Let's do it," he said. "Let's go to your world. I don't want to spend the rest of my days wondering what if. I've always been tied to this land, but maybe it's time for the skies to be my home." Alara's face lit up with a radiant smile, mirroring the breaking dawn. They spent the day preparing for departure. Hans packed lightly. What did one take to another planet? The essentials were few: some clothes, a few cherished photographs, and after a moment's hesitation, a small pouch of earth from his garden, a tangible piece of his past to ground him in his future. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the farm that had been his world, Hans took one last walk through the fields. He paused at the edge of the forest, where he had first found the spacecraft. The trees seemed to stand in silent salute, the wind whispering through the leaves like a soft farewell. Back at the barn, Alara was waiting. The spacecraft's door was open, a gentle ramp extending towards him like an invitation. Hans took a deep breath, feeling the cool evening air fill his lungs. With each step towards the spacecraft, his heart pounded with a mix of excitement and nostalgia. Inside, the spacecraft was unlike anything Hans had ever imagined. Panels of shimmering lights and strange instruments lined the walls, casting the interior in a soft, pulsing glow. Alara showed him to a seat, her hand steadying him as he settled in. "Ready?" she asked, her hand lingering in his. "Ready," he confirmed, his voice steady, but his heart racing. The engines hummed to life, a soothing, almost melodic sound. As the spacecraft lifted off, Hans watched through the window as his farm, the only home he had ever known, shrank away into the distance. There was sadness in leaving, but as the earth itself became a smaller and smaller dot, his spirit soared with the promise of the unknown. Together they crossed the threshold of the atmosphere, the stars beckoning them forward. Hans felt a profound connection to Alara, to the universe, and to the myriad possibilities that lay ahead. The farm, his past life, seemed like a dream fading upon waking, vivid but receding into the background of a new, exhilarating reality. As the spacecraft ventured deeper into the cosmos, towards a distant world that awaited his arrival, Hans realized that true home was not a place, but where the heart finds love and peace. In this vast, infinite universe, He had found both, and with that realization, Hans embraced his new horizon. Chapter 8. Among the Stars. The spacecraft's engines hummed a low, soothing tune as Hans and Alara approached her home planet, Aurelia. Hans's face was pressed against the small oval window, his eyes wide with wonder. The planet below them shimmered with vibrant hues, a stark contrast to the deep, velvet blackness of space around it. Aurelia's surface sparkled with iridescent oceans and swirling clouds, interspersed with glowing cities that seemed to float above the ground. As they descended, the details became clearer, towering structures of glass and light, forests that glowed with bioluminescent flora, and rivers that sparkled like flowing crystals under the three pale suns of this distant world. Hans, who had once thought the beauty of his Swedish countryside unmatched, found his heart swelling with awe and a bit of disbelief. The spacecraft touched down gently on a platform that seemed to be made of air, but was solid under their feet. Alara, with a proud yet gentle smile, took Hans by the hand as they disembarked. They were immediately greeted by a delegation of Aurelians, their skin shimmering subtly in shades of silver and blue, their eyes bright and welcoming. Alara introduced Hans, her voice filled with affection and pride, as her partner from another world. Their first destination was the Harmony Tower, a spiraling marvel that reached towards the skies, its top lost in the gentle mists above. Inside, the tower was alive with the hum of advanced technology and the murmur of 1,000 voices. Hans was introduced to various alien technologies that Alara casually explained. Healing pods that could cure any ailment in minutes, gravity lifts that floated them effortlessly to different levels, and viewing screens that showed vistas from around the galaxy. As they moved through the city, Hans was struck by the seamless blend of nature and technology. Vast parks filled with exotic plants were dotted with holograms of creatures from different planets, all living in harmony. Children, both human and Aurelian, played together in these spaces, their laughter a universal sound that needed no translation. Alara took him to a residential area where the homes were unlike anything Hans had ever imagined. Transparent spheres suspended in the air, each reflecting the landscape around it. Their home was one of these spheres, and inside it was furnished with simplicity and elegance, emphasizing comfort and the spectacular views outside. That evening, as Aurelia's triple sunset bathed the land in a soft golden light, Hans and Alara stood on their balcony. Hans felt a serene peace settling in his heart. He turned to Alara, who was watching him with an expression of deep love and slight amusement at his endless fascination. "What are you thinking?" she asked, her voice a gentle melody. Hans smiled, his eyes reflecting the sunset. "I was thinking about the farm, the earth beneath my feet, the seasons that dictated my days. And now, here I am, feet still on the ground, but in a world where seasons are controlled, and the earth is far, far away." Alara squeezed his hand, her eyes gleaming with shared emotion. "And yet, here you are, at home in the stars." They spent the night exploring the concepts of time and space as they applied to Aurelia, discussing philosophy and science, their minds and hearts intertwining just as their lives had. Hans, once bound to the soil of his farm, found a new binding in the stars, in the love of a woman from another world, and in the endless possibilities of their shared future. The chapter closes as they retire to their sphere home, the city lights below twinkling like a mirror to the stars above, promising endless nights of discovery and days of wonder. Hans, a man rejuvenated by love and an alien world, falls asleep with a content smile, the universe's mysteries waiting for tomorrow's light. Chapter 9. Reflections of the Heart. In the twilight of a star-bathed evening on Ilara's planet, Hans stood on the balcony of their new home, overlooking a cityscape where light danced off structures unimaginable on Earth. The air hummed with a gentle vibration that seemed to pulse with life itself, a stark contrast to the quiet solitude of his old farm. As he watched the sunset, which glowed with hues of crimson and gold, unlike any twilight back home, his thoughts meandered through the incredible journey he had embarked upon. It was a life reborn from the ashes of solitude, kindled by the flame of love and curiosity. Ilara, with her serene demeanor and boundless intellect, had not only healed his loneliness, but had also rejuvenated his very essence. Standing there, Hans no longer felt the weight of his years. Instead, he felt a vivacity that surged through his veins like the vibrant rivers of this alien world. Their home was a harmonious blend of earthly comfort and alien innovation, with walls that shimmered translucently during the day and offered views of the galaxy at night. It was in this very room, surrounded by artifacts of both their worlds, that Hans and Ilara had spent countless hours sharing stories of their respective planets, their cultures intertwining like the twin helixes of life itself. As the first stars of the evening made their appearance, Ilara joined Hans on the balcony. Her hand found his, an effortless gesture that bridged worlds and species. They stood in silence, a comfortable, companionable stillness that spoke of deep bonds and shared experiences. The journey here had not been without its trials. The technology that rejuvenated Hans, miraculous though it was, also signified a transformation that had initially frightened him. To shed the vestiges of his old life, to embrace an alien future, these were not choices made lightly. But as they gazed out at the night sky, Hans realized that the essence of life, its trials, its joys, and its boundless mysteries, was not so different here than on Earth. The core of existence, he now understood, revolved around connections made, love shared, and the new horizons that beckoned. Ilara squeezed his hand, bringing him back from his reverie. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, her voice a melodious echo in the cool evening air. "I was just reflecting on everything." "On us," Hans replied, turning to meet her gaze. "I used to fear the end of things, the farm, my life, even my memories. But now I see that it's not really about the ending at all, is it? It's about the moments we choose to seize, the love we dare to embrace, and the future we decide to make for ourselves." Ilara smiled, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Yes, every ending is just the start of something new, and I am so glad we started this together." Together they watched as a shooting star carved a fiery trail across the heavens, a celestial symbol of their adventurous spirits. The universe, vast and mysterious, seemed not a frontier of daunting unknowns, but a canvas of limitless possibilities. As the chapter of Hans's old life closed, a new one was already being written in the stars above, a story of interstellar explorations, shared dreams, and the eternal search for meaning in the cosmic expanse. The farm was a cherished memory, its lessons of growth and resilience forever a part of him. But ahead lay uncharted worlds, new challenges, and the unyielding promise of tomorrow. And in this boundless new world, with Ilara by his side, Hans realized that the greatest adventure was not in reaching the stars, but in finding someone to share them with.